Alright, it's MOvember day 14. Today, to keep with the theme of doing stuff for recovery, I wanted to do John Bradshaw's recovery map. So this is it. Essentially, at the centre of it, if we experience adverse childhood experiences, trauma, neglect, what we know now is a broad definition of trauma, everything from sexual and physical abuse at that acute end of the stick, right down to abandonment and neglect, and just having absent parents, less than nurturing, stress parenting. What can happen is that sense of self, that if we'd received healthy presence, which we would have felt a sense of our own preciousness and uniqueness, can then get coloured by trauma. And when that sense of self is coloured by trauma, then at its core, I love the phrase by Bradshaw that we experience toxic shame. And what's that mean? Healthy shame is the feeling that lets us know that we're human, that we, when we feel mildly embarrassed, but our value as a person doesn't go down. How do I understand toxic shame? Well, toxic shame is that feeling, an overwhelming sense of worthlessness, that life's not going to work out for us. Professor Shobe from Harvard University says that people that grow up with healthy valuing and esteeming essentially wake up in the morning and have a felt sense, an implicit sense they're going to be okay. So a lot of people in recovery don't have that, and I would call that, as one way of understanding it, toxic shame. Now, what happens when as a little person we're toxically shamed or in an unsafe environment? The first layer of defences that we develop, that is part of our subcortical way of taking care of ourselves, is that we can suppress at a cortex level, repress for things that are more damaging, but essentially disassociate when it comes to traumas that we feel are either life-threatening physically or sexually, or that are absolutely humiliating to the core. Pierre Melody phrased it as spiritual abuse, but what we know now is that when there's ongoing humiliation, which they discovered in the adverse childhood experience study, that ongoing humiliation leaves people with the symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress. Now, this ability to disassociate is generally experienced when the child themselves feel that their well-being is at threat. Either life is at threat, or they just simply can't escape a bombardment of abuse and trauma. Now, essentially, that can be felt by people. I heard it described, and I'm an enthusiast, not a scientist, so don't take my word for this. But the bottom part of the brain, the top of the brain stem, that has an instinct for, when you're a little person, to reach for care. And when you're reaching for care by someone who's offending you, then that mid part of the brain, the fight and flight, when we repel away and we've got an instinct towards, is the brain disconnecting from itself. It's in a state of overwhelm. It cannot absolve that conflict. So we disassociate for that moment. Now, what happens next, as Bradshaw worked out, is that we can go into family roles. Now, you would think that there'd be something else would come first, but what I've witnessed with people in recovery is that we can really early, as a child, reach towards the parent. Now, Pierre Melody had an idea that the energy needs to come from the adult towards the parent, but if the parent is unwell, the child has basic survival needs, so the energy starts to go the other way. So when that energy starts to go the other way, we go into a role. Now, essentially, the roles that were being talked about in family systems theory is the first child is traditionally first cab off the rank. Their energy starts going towards the parent who's in distress, and that's quite heroic to the family system. The second child comes along as a scapegoat. They can't be as helpful as the hero. They're not developmentally able to help like the hero can. And so they learn that if they act out, they get attention. So negative attention is better than no attention. So they start to act out. Essentially, the hero puts the vase on the table to make mummy or daddy happy, and the scapegoat knocks it over to get that attention. We can have a lost child role where we learn that a child can get lost in the lounge room, parents present, we just disconnect, go into fantasy and hide away through play, fantasy and avoiding the family by being in the family. And then the mascot can come along. Now the mascot can be the role that brings humour, relief to the family system through humour. Now, there's plenty of information of this online, but essentially if you're a single child, you can go into a variety of these roles if that parent's not available to meet your needs. The next thing that we start to see is more of a sophisticated defence mechanism. And these defence mechanisms are where we start to see the frontal cortex engage, and it's the defences in the family. A child generally inherits the way the family disconnects. We've had those commercials of late in Australia where they show a few generations of dad yelling out to a son to go get us a beer, and they talk about that learnt behaviour. Well, defence mechanisms and how a family distances itself from its pain is what we'll see in this category. So we'll see anything from rage to humour to being nice to rationalising to justifying. And the list can go on depending on the family system. So you can have a wall of pleasant, a wall of rage, a wall of sarcasm. So we can find different ways that the family disconnects. What's its goal? Its goal is to continue to move out from that shame. So we get out here to these particular defences that keep us disconnected. Last but not least is our behavioural cover-ups. So what happens here is where we find those things that are more common. Drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, food, work, sex. And then we start to fill in the blanks there with what is it that we look for individuals that generally, what do we do to cover up things that again keep us busy, keep us moving away from the shame. Now, why they call this a recovery map is that essentially when Pia Mellody started to talk about this, and then other theorists got involved, Sharon Wechhauser-Cruz, Virginia Satir, Claudia Black. I'm always going to leave people out. But essentially John Bradshaw, when he talks about shame, is that if I just give up, if I come along and I go, right, that's it, I just have to stop drinking. If I stop drinking, everything's going to get better. If I stop using drugs, everything's going to get better. If I stop sexually acting out, everything's going to get better. But essentially what happens is people get worse before they get better, because all they're essentially doing there is just taking away the stuff that they did to numb out everything underneath it. So essentially in recovery, these defense mechanisms are crucial for us to get a hold of. How do I distance myself from how I feel, and how do I keep creating what I came from, because those defenses keep recreating that family system and how it distances itself from taking care of itself. The family roles are really important in recovery for me to learn to step out of those caretaking, enabling, heroic, scapegoating roles when it comes to relationships. When it comes to the earlier, more crude defences of suppression, repression and disassociation, that's that family work. And what we know now is that the complex PTSD, the polyvagal theory, how people go offline, the somatic experiences that lead us towards getting to that subcortical level. Brain spotting is a wonderful technique that gets in underneath that sort of frontal cortex and helps us work at that deeper level. Essentially what we're doing here is reducing shame and what we know now at a complex level is that we are integrating the damage that was done to the brain, because this is sort of the bit we could see. It was the experientialists that saw this, but now the neuroscientists have come along and they've said, wow, we can see now and can track with MRIs exactly how trauma affects the brain. But essentially, if you're out there and you're going, you know, why isn't my recovery working? I've stopped that behaviour, then it might be much more than that. And so don't give up hope. Sometimes when I present this, people feel hopeless. But to me, who, you know, I relate to this. This helped explain what was happening to me, that it was much more. There wasn't something wrong with me, that I wasn't just getting it by working the steps around that secondary symptom. There was just so much more down to that core. Now, the interesting thing is here, what Pia Melody said is that when we're toxically shamed, Bradshaw called this the soul murder. And what Pia said is that it disconnected us from that ability to have a power greater than ourselves, because we were stuck in immaturity. We were stuck in self-focus. I was God. I didn't need God. What happens here is when we do this work, we deal with the behavioural cover-ups. We identify the defence mechanisms and start to implement boundaries and taking care of our reality appropriately. We look at the family roles and then step back into engaging as a functional adult, not from one of those roles. And if we go back and start to do that original trauma work, essentially what it gives us is those functional adult skills to be in the moment, identifying my reality at depth. And I get access back to that intuition. I get access back to God. So I hope you've enjoyed this MOvember Day 14. I'll keep them coming. Take care.